But first, the story of how the Victorian Government went it alone and used nothing much more than bouncers to run hotel security at quarantine hotels in this state instead of the police force and the Defence Force used in every other state in the country. Well, I tell you, it gets murkier and more unorthodox, if I can use that phrase, with each bit of paper I read and with every call I make or call I receive. Now, how this was set up, how the companies were chosen, who contacted them, how they were paid, how many millions they got. Indeed, all of this. It's not the way government works in any legitimate system I've ever seen. This wasn't a big policy announcement where there's been a careful cabinet submission process worked up by a department, properly costed by finance officials and then taken through the cabinet machine by a responsible minister. It was all kicked off, as we now know, when the Premier's now former departmental head, Mr Chris Eccles, stepped out of the National Cabinet meeting to get the ball rolling on the urgent establishment of a program to quarantine returning overseas travellers. That was around 12 noon, Friday the 27th of March. And after speaking with the Premier's own political chief of staff, who was waiting outside that cabinet room, where he told her all about the decision of National Cabinet and what the Prime Minister would shortly announce at 2:30 p.m, Eccles says he then spoke with Simon Femister, the Secretary or Head of the Jobs Department. Now, the Minister for the Jobs Area and Portfolio is Mr Martin Pakula. Remember that, because I'll come back to him in a moment. So Eccles tells Simon Femister, so the evidence says, and let's not forget now he's the former head of the Premier's department because his recent evidence at the Coat inquiry didn't square up with the facts. Eccles says he told Femister a big decision was on its way. We've got to be ready to accommodate all these returning travellers in hotel quarantine by midnight Saturday night, so get your skates on, sort out hotels and airport transport. But that's not what the written record says that Femister did. When Eccles then goes back into National Cabinet and the Chief of Staff, well, we actually don't know where she went because she's never given any testimony and she hasn't given a statement, but put her to one side too. Femister convenes then a meeting at about 12:30 of a handful of his trusted public service colleagues. And they start working on a hotels plan, a transport plan, and a whole lot more, including security. Now, we know this happens because here's the notes from the meeting that have now been read into evidence in the Coat inquiry. Remember, at this stage, we're talking about 12:30. National Cabinet, that meeting hasn't even finished. But these officials, after being told by Eccles when he stepped out of the room, well, they're all racing to this deadline because they know at 2:30 p.m, the Prime Minister is going to announce all of this. And they also know that after that, their own Premier will do his own press conference, which he did at 3:15. Now, there's a lot of conflicting evidence because almost every character in this circus has put in a 1 or 2 or 3 different sets of versions of the truth, multiple written statements. And in terms of their oral evidence, well, you know what I mean. It's I don't remember, I don't recall. And very little probing, as I said last night, from counsel assisting. What we do know is that the PM said there would be police, there would be the ADF, all there to operate security at these hotels.
The ADF will be there to put boots on the ground to support them in their enforcement efforts, and I thank the ADF for their great support in turning up to this task. We believe these important actions are the most important we can take right now because of what you've done, Australia.
2:30, that was 2:30. And moments after he finished, well, the Victorian Premier threw in his first ever mention of private security being used at his press conference down in Melbourne.
But we have sufficient capacity and we've done the work early to be able to accommodate those people. They will be housed, they will be fed, they will be transported. There'll be no cost to them, but this is the best way to ensure absolute compliance. Police, private security, all of our health team will be able to monitor compliance in a much easier way, in a static location, one hotel or a series of hotels, as the case may be.
Now, the whole "I don't know who made the decision" is a mockery. No political leader I have ever seen announces a decision that they're not sure about. That Daniel announced just then, didn't he? Daniel Andrews just announced it. The fact that he announced it tells me everything I need to know. Now, when it comes to the companies that end up getting these multi-million-dollar contracts, this is where it gets interesting. There's evidence to the inquiry that the first contact the Femister bureaucrats make with these companies is late on Friday night. We're told in evidence via emails around 11:30 p.m. The companies, the officials, all of them say in evidence this is the first time there was any contact. Here's a copy of one of the emails, 11:33 p.m. Friday night, from an official in Femister's Jobs Department to Unified Security, asking if Unified Security would be willing to get involved in what had been announced by the Premier and the PM earlier that afternoon. Again, the bureaucrats say this is their first contact with Unified. And Unified say this is the first contact they have had with anyone from state or federal governments regarding hotel quarantine. They say it in the evidence, again and again in the inquiry, and they say it in a statement that they had sent to me. Now, how does this all square to you? When Eccles steps out of National Cabinet and he spoke to the Chief of Staff and then he spoke to Simon Femister, telling them, as I said, everything that had been decided in that room, but none of which had been made public, all ahead of them racing around and getting organised before the PM announced it at 2:30. Well, at the very same time, around 12:30, Unified Security just happened to send this urgent email to their own security staff. Here it is, 12:36 p.m, from the company's majority owner, Mr David Millward, telling them that COVID's such a fast-moving issue that they needed to get online immediately and do the federal government's COVID compliance course, a prerequisite for Victoria's hotel security work. But of course, that hasn't even been announced, so no one knows it's a prerequisite yet, or do they? And that, he says in this email, it all has to be done ASAP, and that they are to send him back confirmation that they all had done the course by 2:30 p.m. Coincidentally, just at the time the PM makes that announcement coming out of National Cabinet, 2:30 p.m. on Friday the 27th of March. Now, there's coincidence and there's conspiracy. You be the judge. Now, on the very next day, the Saturday, March 28th, this mob, Unified Security, well, they get signed up as the first of the security firms to do the guard work around these travelling hotels. Now, they start straight away, midnight on the Saturday night. And even though they are not on the preferred tender list with the Victorian Government, well, somehow they're the first one to get the work. $30 million, 3 months' work. Indeed, in the days that immediately follow all of this, there's a lot of concern from good people inside the Victorian Public Service that this use of Unified is a long, long, long way away from the rules. A number of officials ask serious questions about how they got into this loop, how they got the job in the first place. Some even suggest that the whole thing must be unwound. Here's this very serious email from an official in the procurement area in the Jobs Department, all in evidence in the Code inquiry, asking some really tough questions about why Unified was chosen outside the proper processes. Saying, and I quote, "I understand there was an urgency to get things up and running quickly over the weekend, but to have a non-approved firm providing security and effectively enforcing government regulation at quarantine sites off the back of some emails and phone calls represents a significant risk to individuals involved and the department/government that is not easily mitigated." Well, too right, a significant risk to individuals, 800 dead Victorians later, all absolutely connected, as we know, to this botched quarantine program from this incompetent and now covering up excuse of a government. But even as this valiant public servant calls them all out, well, Simon Femister's people, his department, they push back hard. They say, too late, Unified Security are already in place. So Unified Security stays put. They collect $30+ million. And tonight, 800 plus dead, and Victoria still is in lockdown. Now you're asking me, aren't you? I can tell you, you're asking me, if they weren't on any list, if they weren't approved, then how did Unified get the email? Late back on Friday night. How did they get the email to ask them to do the job? Well, here's how it happened. Because today, look what I found. A whole lot of text messages buried away in evidence. Well, there's this WhatsApp group or text message group. They call themselves Working with the Vic A-Team. You can't see what was there because it's all been redacted. You can't see what was said to make Unified so critical that they had to be included against all the Victorian Government rules. But it must have been good, because on that text message is this response: OK, Unified are in. When asked how they are going to get hold of Unified, remember this is Friday night, we're talking about 10:30 p.m. and the time of that text message, straight away comes this response: have texted you David Millward's number. Now Millward, we know, we talked about him before, Unified Security, yep, he's the bloke that sent the urgent email to his staff saying get your training done all before 2:30 when the PM announced the hotel quarantine program before anybody else knew about it. Now they say that's all a coincidence. I am a lot harder to convince. Now what this does is tonight it poses some real questions for the Coate inquiry and the Andrews government. Clearly someone on that Friday at that time was close enough to David Millward to have his private mobile number. Who is this person? It's not disclosed in those text messages. Why did they have his mobile number? And did they use his mobile number at any other time during the day when they knew via Chris Eccles what was to come out of the National Cabinet meeting? Now, I'm not aware that any records for any one of these people or anyone in the Jobs Department have been provided. I'm not aware that the Minister has been asked. I'm not aware that the Secretary, Simon Femister, has been asked for his records. Remember, both Millward and the government say that the first contact they had with each other in evidence on oath was that email at 11:33 p.m. But given they were chasing mobile numbers for Millward and they only handed over a mobile, nothing else, then presumably at 10:30, back then, someone must have had to call him late on Friday night to get his email and then send the email at 11:33. There's a good hour there between the texts and the email. So who rang David Millward? And what did they say to David Millward? We can't ask Millward because he gave a statement to the inquiry, but he never actually turned up to give evidence. Instead, the Coate inquiry swapped him out for someone else in the company. But why didn't he appear, given he's such a critical player in all of this? It's his company got the $30 million contract, a company that wasn't even on the shortlist. The conduct of the Departmental Secretary Simon Femister in all of this is highly suspect. It's against established public service custom. If I was the Minister and he was my Secretary, well, he would be stood aside tonight. But of course, as I said, don't forget the Minister, Martin Pakula, in all of this. This was his department, his Secretary, his departmental staff. Well, his evidence, Pakula's evidence to the inquiry, is that he knew nothing. He knew about the hotels, but he didn't know about the security. That his own department, on this Friday and Saturday, clearly, well, they were all over it. Well, Martin Pakula, I don't believe you. And you are next on my list.